Welcome back to another episode of House to Home. My name is Grace Youngson, and I'm here with my colleague Joseph Kohm. And this is a podcast by Family Policy Alliance Foundation, where we bring you the latest news around what's going on with regards to family policy and how that affects you. And this week, we're actually taking a story from my home country. A British lady was convicted for offering consensual conversation in an abortion facility buffer zone, and she's been ordered to pay £20,000 in prosecution costs. And so we're going to discuss what this means and how this also relates to the US. I'll let you expand a little more on the story, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. I'd love to. I mean, this is a tragic story, but I think we're going to be able to pull some really good lessons and some hope for our audience from it. So the main reporting, this has been a widely reported story, at least in pro-family and social conservative circles, but we're taking our specific reporting today from the Catholic news agency, CNA, and we'll link to this website or to their reporting on this in the show notes. But the headline is Woman Convicted for Silently Holding Sign Outside UK Abortion Clinic. As you said, Grace, a 64-year-old woman was convicted of standing near an abortion clinic in southern England and holding a sign simply saying, quote, "Here to talk, comma, if you want," end quote. The case provides further evidence of an erosion of freedom of expression in the United Kingdom, which has recently become a diplomatic issue with the U.S. We'll talk about that too. So during this incident in question in 2024, this woman's name is Livia Tasiki Bolt. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. She was standing silently and holding this sign and having what she described as consensual conversations with people passing by, according to her legal team. However, she was within what UK law describes as, and I'm quoting again, a buffer zone, end quote. And what these buffer zones do is they criminalize the influencing of people within 150 meters, which for us Americans who don't use the metric system, about 500 feet of an abortion clinic in the UK. And I mean, this is, like you said, Grace, the final ruling was the Poole Magistrates Court for the South Coast of England, which is part of the lower court system there in England, found her guilty and issued a consensual discharge, but ordered her to pay prosecution costs of £20,000, which equals about $26,000. So not a small sum there. We do want to mention that Ms. Tasiki Bold was and is continued to be represented by the Alliance Defending Freedom International. And they're considering, I believe, whether they're going to appeal this or not and see what other legal options there are for her. So, Grace, before we dive into just a lot of the layers of difficulty in this story, this is your home country. And I want to give you first dibs at what your reaction is to this story.
Yeah, I think this really saddens me, the fact that it's coming out of my home country. I think this trend towards buffer zones and ultimately denying women any kind of last-minute resort help. Most women walk into an abortion clinic because they feel like it is their only option. And Planned Parenthood, want them to go in there and have the abortion. They do not want them to have their conscience pricked, or most women, a lot of women, I should rephrase that, barely have anyone to really talk to when they're considering that. They're in a state of panic, they're in a state of fear, and Planned Parenthood is fully capitalizing on all of that. They're fully capitalizing on her vulnerability in that moment, and then trying to deny her any other kind of help, I think is really sad, and it's a really sad move to see.
You're right. It's layers of tragedy, Grace. I appreciate your sensitivity towards this issue, which is so important for many of us, many people that have listening. I mean, the stats show that almost every person has some kind of personal abortion-related story. This is a very personal story for, we're assuming probably almost everyone that will be listening to this show or reading these stories. So I do think balanced with that, this is also just in a broader sense, a little bit less personal. I do think this represents a values fork in the road for the UK. I mean, this and several other cases like it that have been very high profile in the UK, they show that the UK essentially is at a decision point with its values. They can either recommit to values like freedom of expression and freedom of religion, or they can continue their downward spiral into social Marxism that I think has really followed their gradual commitment to fiscal Marxism. And that gets into a lot of UK history over the past 50 years, particularly after the Second World War. But it's pretty undeniable that the UK has descended into slowly, more gradually, economic Marxism, and that is inevitably followed by social Marxism, and this is a reflection of that. So, Grace, I think we should dive in a little bit more here. Do you mind if I chat for a few minutes about what these buffer zones are in the UK?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this could be a bit of a difficult conversation or difficult concept for Americans to grasp because we have something called the First Amendment here to our Constitution, which protects freedom of expression and freedom of religion, and we often hear it termed freedom of speech. So the UK doesn't quite have a First Amendment. They do have a generally a pretty good free speech tradition, but recently there was introduced in the UK a concept called buffer zones, and these started with several localities in Great Britain with larger abortion facilities that set up around the physical location of an abortion facility a zone in which freedom of expression was curtailed. And the idea behind this was to protect vulnerable women from harassment, maybe even from physical assault, things like that. And we can debate the merits of how we got there or not, whether that's reasonable or not. But that was what some of these localities did. And then the new labor government, once it came into power, decided to introduce these zones to abortion clinics nationwide on October 31st of 2024. So now every abortion clinic on the main island of Great Britain has one of these buffer zones in which freedom of speech and expression, and even as we also found out in a separate story, freedom of religion can all be curtailed. There was a congruent case of a British Army veteran who had lost one of his children to abortion, and he had been convicted of simply silently praying outside of an abortion zone within one of these buffer zones. So that's the state of play there in the UK with this idea of a buffer zone, which I think there's one or two states in America that have them. The state of Colorado has them, but many of our listeners will probably be surprised to learn about this because we don't have something like that in the US. I'm sure many of our listeners will be familiar with, for example, the 40 Days for Life campaign, which allows people to pray outside of abortion clinics and offer consensual counseling. So this is a very different policy than most of what the United States has. And we think that background here is important just to understand this case.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually interesting that you mentioned that it's here in Colorado. I literally live opposite a Planned Parenthood, and I've heard that people have gotten in trouble for, crossing that zone limit. And it was really interesting when I first heard that because I was like, oh, I thought America was different on that basis of things. And I think that is what is potentially concerning about seeing a trend where this is growing. And this story out of the UK is not just specific to the UK. This has ripple effects over here in the US. And I know that I think what's really interesting about this story, just coming back to how this lady was just being there with a sign that was very simple to just say, hey, I'm here to talk if you need to. I have a friend of mine who has personally helped a few women by meeting them on the sidewalk of Planned Parenthood in California and had a conversation with them for them to realize through the conversation, these women realized, I absolutely do not want an abortion. I want my baby. And now these women are flourishing with their beautiful babies. I actually met them when I visited California a little while ago. And, this whole conversation around harassment or not, she actually made a social media reel where she has this mother with her baby all happy. And it's POV, the woman I harassed. And I think that's really interesting. I do think, not every single advocate on the pro-life side maybe has done a great job at, doing this in the most sensitive way. I think this lady provides a good example of a far more sensitive approach. And I think one thing that's crazy to me is the fact that you could get prosecuted for praying in your head is just crazy. Like, how can you
Yeah.
even prove that?
Thought crimes, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you also linked it back to Marxism. I studied politics with Cambridge University for a little bit before I came out to the US, and what really hit me was the Marxism, because pretty much every single one of my lecturers was Marxist. A lot of my classmates were very Marxist. And I was like kind of shocked, like, oh my gosh, this is the state of where we're at. This is the state of educated people. I remember submitting one essay that clearly was not very Marxist, and my lecturer told me, like, oh, you just do not understand. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I do understand. Like, and it's interesting because I feel like oftentimes people who are in that way of thought, more of a Marxist mentality, want to, and this goes along with the ideology of Marxism, but it's like some people know better than others. It's elevating one person above another. You have more of a bureaucratic system where it's like the elite rule, all the people who are just dumb just follow along like sheep. And I think that we're seeing some of that here. It's like we're trying to say that one person's rights should be elevated over another person's rights. And that is really concerning where that can lead in the future. And it actually goes right along with the whole concept of abortion. Abortion is basically elevating one person's rights over another. And I think abortion is a really sensitive subject, but ultimately, I've listened to a number of podcasts, women sharing their stories of navigating unplanned pregnancies and choosing to have the baby in the midst of that. And the consistent theme with all of them was like, I had to come to a point where I had to choose not to be selfish. And even though it's hard to hear that and to say that, abortion is ultimately rooted in selfishness and fear. And so if we allow this to keep expanding, it will seep into all other aspects of society too.
No, I agree, Grace. That's well said. I appreciate your background in understanding the Marxist implications here. I mean, I almost hate to beat up on Karl Marx and his inheritors, but they've made it so easy for us. And this is what social Marxism says: is it's the strong preying upon the weak. It's your life for mine, which I find to be a perverse inversion of the gospel message, which Jesus came to say, "My life for yours." And Christians are now all here to say that same thing. But I want to preface that by saying that can be easy to say depending on the circumstance you're in. So, Grace, I can only imagine, but I can imagine and empathize with what it is like to face an unplanned pregnancy. And I mean, does it seem to you like maybe there's no purpose for this is not a good policy to restrict speech like this even a zone where sensitive things are happening? But I do think rather than an excuse, there's an explanation for how a country may have wanted to try this as an initial solution to a problem. I mean, sidewalk counseling there's a history to that in the pro-life movement. And as you said, there are a lot of people today that are only alive because of sidewalk counselors. And that's a good thing. So sidewalk counseling in and of itself outside an abortion clinic is a good and useful form of your witness. But not all pro-lifers, not all Christians have been good stewards of that opportunity and that right. And I think it has done some damage in the sense that it's gotten laws like this passed. I mean, would you agree with that, Grace? Could you see how this could be threatening, or at least sidewalk counseling, if done incorrectly, could be threatening to a woman facing a very vulnerable situation?
Yeah, I can see how it could be perceived as threatening, and I can also, I have relationships with a lot of women who have faced unplanned pregnancies. So I can really like talk from a lot of intimate kind of experience in that sense. And I can understand all of the fear that you're facing in that moment. I do also think that Marxism always wants to restrict the truth because they know the power of it. They know that they can't fight against the truth, and the devil knows that too. And I think that it becomes extremely dangerous when we do restrict the truth, because if we're even just talking about it from a woman's perspective, women are better off when they choose motherhood. And I mean, I know a woman. She was caught up in like the most horrific lifestyle and series of events that took place that led to her being in an unplanned pregnancy involving drugs, abuse. She was very, very suicidal. Like the classic picture of why some people would argue abortion is necessary. And she actually was originally going to have an abortion. And then a friend of hers was like, hey, why don't you just go and get an ultrasound? Because she had a lot of health concerns going on as well. And so she did. And when she saw her little girl on ultrasound, she was actually so relieved that she was still alive, because she was on birth control, had taken a few plan Bs. Like, this little girl really should not be alive. And it has literally saved her life being a mom, because now she has a reason to live. She has a reason to get off of drugs. She has a reason to choose herself to live. I mean, she told me, she's like, if I had gone through with the abortion, probably wouldn't be alive myself right now, because I wouldn't have been able to deal with all of that post-abortion trauma, which no one talks about, because it's convenient not to talk about that when you're trying to encourage women to have an abortion. But when we look at these things, sidewalk counseling, I don't think it's the most ideal thing. Like, it would be better if we can reach women before the fact that they're literally at the door of Planned Parenthood. I think that's the ideal scenario. But if that is our only chance to reach that woman and to save her from making such a huge life-altering decision, then I think it's really important that we have that available to her. And I do think that, yes, there have been some ways in which it's probably been gone about that hasn't given the best overall branding to that. But it doesn't mean that we should stop that. We just need to fix the way in which we're going about it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm reminded of an old proverb that says the misuse of something does not negate its use. And you're right. There's a lot that leads up to a woman ultimately making a decision to get out of a car and walk into an abortion facility. And the church and the social conservative movement should be there at every step of the way leading up to that. But that last minute chance to save the life of a child by just offering your help and support to a woman in that situation, it has saved lives. And I think we have a great example of this done well. I mean, this woman was just holding a sign offering to talk, not even saying anything. It's a pretty attractive witness, which is why I think what gets to the heart of this matter, Grace, we talk about how this could be intimidating. Like, we can all think of examples of when that might be. But this woman clearly was not that. Just a cursory overview of the facts of the case showed this woman was not intimidating. But the judge ruled that she was. And I think that's what's really revealing about this case is there's this new trend, I feel like, around the world. Particularly, we hear a lot of it in Europe in the news, which is that free expression in and of itself is intimidating. Almost like you have a right to not be offended, to not be a little, you have a little anxiety induced in you by someone else's speech. And I mean, that's awfully nice. I think one day we'll have a world like that when Jesus returns and the world is made new. We will never have to be offended or hurt or put out by anyone's words anymore. But that is not the world we live in. And that's part of why the founders of America decided to have a free speech right within our Constitution, which is to show that the only answer to bad speech is more good speech. That is the only way to protect individual freedom and to ensure that we can counter intimidating or anxiety-inducing speech with the truth that reaffirms you and solidifies you. So, Grace, before we finish this episode, though, we want to try to articulate what would be the best argument in favor of something like this. We want to give the other side its credence, and we always try with this section to state in best terms that we can, what would someone who thinks differently than us say about this? We want them to hear this and think, yes, that's what I believe. So, Grace, do you want to take a stab at that for this case?
Sure. And I think we've kind of been articulating it as we've been going along. We've been approaching
Yeah.
that. They may say this is harassing to women. She has reproductive rights, and you shouldn't be infringing upon that. Which I should articulate it first. I already want to jump in and discuss some of those points, but and that you're being insensitive, this kind of thing, by doing this. And if I am allowed to jump in a little, I would definitely respond to some of those things. I think it's really interesting what you brought up about the whole intimidating, anxiety-inducing facet. I will say that these women are not, they're already extremely anxious. Planned Parenthood actually deals in fear, basically, and inducing anxiety, because they're telling young girls, if you get pregnant, don't tell your parents, like that's a bad idea. Like they're creating fear. And oftentimes, young women are too scared to tell anyone. And then they tell someone and it's like, okay, that wasn't even that bad. Like they didn't even react badly. I've been told by my sex ed teacher from Planned Parenthood that they're going to hate me forever and cast me out, and not everyone does respond perfectly. There are some tough stories where things like that happen, but for the most part, I think it's actually Planned Parenthood who are dealing in the fear and the anxiety, not our side. And so and we're simply providing an opportunity, as this lady was, for conversation.
Yeah.
And that says a lot to me. If a woman is willing to talk to a complete stranger about such a big life-altering thing, she must seriously be doubting whether she should go through with that or not. There must be something deep in her where she does not want this, because to be willing to talk to a complete stranger about something so big as that, I think there is something seriously wrong with this picture. And there is a huge reason why Planned Parenthood would want to stop this, because they know that it's going to cost them business ultimately.
No, you're 100% right, Grace. I mean, even on much lighter, broader cultural messaging, I feel like you can't open social media anymore these days without hearing some celebrity saying that some celebrity without kids saying that all their friends they have that have kids are miserable, as if your life ends as soon as you have kids. And you can see why that would be a very helpful message to an organization like Planned Parenthood. I mean, that would hurt their bottom line if it turned out that when you have kids, your life begins. They make your life more wonderful than it already was before. And like you said kind of earlier, Grace, that most women, I mean, we know this from research, they don't know what support is available to them from the government, from the church, from pro-life communities. They don't know what's out there to help them. And in this moment of panic, it can feel this incredible sense of helplessness and vulnerability. But we know from research and from many people that are alive today because of this, that if women just know what's out there to help them, a lot of times that can really make the difference between whether they choose to continue with that pregnancy or not. So I feel like so much of this revolves around just knowledge, and we're in an age of information and misinformation. And there's no question that Planned Parenthood has and other big abortion providers like those in the UK have an incentive to peddle in misinformation to help their bottom line.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I think, actually, just to back up what you just said, statistically, there is a statistic. It's Students for Life came out with a study that 78% of women facing an unplanned pregnancy have no idea of other options available to them apart from abortion. I mean, right there is a huge problem. Most women, apparently it's pro-choice, but they don't even feel like they have choice, because they're not aware of the other things that are available to support them. And so I think that is a call for us as Christians to do a better job. The number one factor that influences a woman's decision if she finds herself in an unplanned pregnancy is the conversation she has around her. It's the people around her and what they're encouraging her to do. And so as believers, I think it's so important that we make ourselves available to those around us. You never know what someone's facing. I think oftentimes we kind of wrongly assume that no young girl in the church is going to face this. I have helped lots of young women in the church, in Bible college, who have faced this. And I think it's super important to make yourself available just to talk. And always make sure that those around you know that you will be there for them to talk, you will be there for them, and that you will encourage them. And so I think that's something we should never shy away from that either.
Yeah.
I was in a car with a couple friends a couple years back, and one of them was telling me about her friend who was like planning to get an abortion, and I'm like, did you talk to her about it? And she's like, no. And I'm like, what? Like, this is a huge deal. You should have a conversation with her. That to me is like ultimate, like, oh my goodness, what are we doing? And so I think if we can give a call to our audience at the end of this episode to make yourself more available to those around you, just it can just be as simple as a conversation, because literally one sentence of saying you can do this can ignite that inner knowing in that woman and that strength, and actually encourage her to act on what she really does want to do, which is have the baby.
Yeah. And then you can go further from there and say, here's all the ways I can help you. Here's how our friends will help you. We will come around you, do whatever it takes to meet your needs so that you can keep this baby. And I think if you're listening and you're frustrated at how pro-lifers or conservatives or especially the church have been portrayed by culture as being judgmental or rude or harassing, then go out there and change that perspective with how you live. I mean, the Bible says, I think it's in First Peter, that you should live such good lives among the pagans that when they try to accuse you of wrongdoing, they will be ashamed, because your life will be the ultimate reflection of Christ and the ultimate rebuke of that accusation. I think we have a good example in this poor woman that was convicted here. I hope she sees real justice, not this someday. And Grace, I'll just leave with a slight note of encouragement for our audience before I let you close the episode, which is that this is not unwatched by world leaders with more biblical perspectives. I would say some of the reporting leading up to this ruling by this judge showed that, I mean, the United States is currently, at the time of recording, in a trade war with most people in the world, including the UK, and they're negotiating trade deals, including one with the UK that's honestly way overdue. After Brexit, we really should have had a trade deal with the UK, but they're finally getting down to doing that. And it was widely reported that U.S. negotiators were paying attention to the outcome of this case because they want to know what values they still share or don't share with nations like the UK, who really birthed the United States out of them. So this is being watched, and there are leaders in this world who still care tremendously about freedom of expression and are committed to upholding it. So we at FPA and FPAF will continue to work towards that, but know that this is very much a topic open to discussion around the world and debate worth having. So I think that should be an encouraging note by which to end this episode.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode of House to Home, a podcast by Family Policy Alliance Foundation. I'm Grace Youngson, being here with Joseph Kohm as usual. We are here every week as we discuss new things that come up, new events, current events, and how they relate to you and your family. So don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And our social media handles will also be in the description, so you can connect with us there too. We'll see you next week.